and welcome to the Earliest Summit with me, Kathy Brodie. On this summit, we're exploring speech, language and communication, and today we are talking about emotions and how to help children problem solve and manage their behaviour. And I'm really excited and delighted to be joined today by Molly Potter. Molly is the author of more than 30 children's books that mostly help children develop their understanding of topics such as emotions, positive mental health, behaviour, celebrating diversity, death, and the birds and the bees. And they're all great. And they're beautifully illustrated as well. They're super. Molly's background is in primary education as a teacher, advisor, and a director. A very warm welcome to the Early Years Summit, Molly Potter.
It's a pleasure to be here, Kathy. Very much so.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming onto the summit. It's so exciting. And today we're going to be talking about emotional intelligence. Now, I know that you're a huge advocate of emotional intelligence, but let's just start right at the very beginning. What is it that you mean by emotional intelligence and why are you an advocate of it?
Okay, so I guess if I was to say in a nutshell, what emotional intelligence is managing your emotions rather than them controlling you. So it's quite often with emotions, we just look at the reaction. So somebody experiences emotion and they go straight to the reaction. They don't look at the backstory. So somebody who's emotionally intelligent will have a look at the feeling that was triggered, why it was triggered, what interpretation of the situation they had, so that which would have impacted what they ended up feeling, and then working out, is there anything useful about the emotion? Is there a message the emotion is giving me so that I have to decide whether I'm going to act on that or not? So, for example, the obvious one is fear. You know, if you feel fear and a car's coming towards you, the message is get out of there quick, jump out of the way. If the fear is because you're standing in front of a huge audience of people, that's different. You're not in immediate danger. So you have to manage that differently, but there's still a message there. This is something that scares me. What can I do to make it less scary? Can I practice what I'm going to say? Or, you know, there's a message there. Or even anger. Anger is often when somebody's crossed a boundary or done something unacceptable to you. So do you have to then be emotionally intelligent and decide to be assertive and kind of work out how to stop that happening again? Or do you have to work out that you need to let it go because there's not a lot you can do about it? So all that backstory, many people don't do. They just go straight to the reaction. So emotional intelligence in a way makes you far more deliberate in your actions and less likely to make situations worse. Now, I went from a nutshell answer to quite an elaborate one there, Kathy. And the other part of the question, why am I an advocate of it? Well, I don't know if you remember when the SEAL curriculum came in, social and emotional aspects of learning, and the government pumped that out into all schools. And I was part of an advisory team then linked to things to do with personal social health education, PSHE. And I remember looking at that and thinking, wow, that's amazing. I don't remember learning anything about emotions in my childhood. And if I'm honest, I didn't have very good role models for it. So I started to look at that curriculum, and that was when it first sort of came onto my radar, really. And from then, I've read just about everything I can get my hands on to do with emotional intelligence and emotional literacy. Because in actual fact, I think it's really key to self-awareness and self-development. If you can, and I wouldn't say I was good with my own emotions when I was younger, but since learning what emotional intelligence is all about and implementing them, life just got so much easier. So for something that generally isn't on many people's radar, it's almost seen as like they're an inconvenience, emotions. I feel quite strongly that it's so helpful if you just make people that little bit more aware of what's going on for them emotionally, the backstory to why they're feeling what they feel, and be curious about it rather than going straight to the reaction that's often unhelpful and doing that really unconsciously. So yes, God, I've got a lot to say, haven't I, Kathy?
There's so much to think about there and unpack. How absolutely fabulous. And it's interesting that you choose the emotion anger, as because I think very often anger is the one that we want to suppress, or you want to reduce anger. But as you say, if you're using it properly, then you can actually use some of those emotions and turn them from what might be considered very negative to something very positive. And I know one of the things that you talk about is using those emotions to help children problem solve, which I thought was really interesting. So how can children use those sorts of emotions to problem solve?
Right, I've been doing this a lot with parents recently, and sometimes teachers as well, but it's this idea that quite often nowadays, many of us as parents and teachers, when a child has a problem of some sort, we jump in super quick and sort it all out, or we jump in and give advice, or we tell them what to do. And I'm sure you've heard the term helicopter parents, which it's a bit of a scathing term, but it's this idea. And I think after maybe our parents' generation, where maybe they went so far down the end of just letting us get on with it, perhaps generations later have kind of jumped in too quickly to do everything for their children. And of course, long term, this doesn't really do them any favours. In fact, it's been linked to creating anxiety, because the children don't develop a kind of an understanding that they can be self-reliant. There's always a parent at the end of the phone when they're older. But when they're younger, if we're sorting absolutely everything out for them, they don't learn that actually I can sort this out myself, which is a great lesson to learn as a child, as eventually they're going to have to be effective adults, that you won't be following them around 24/7 sorting things out for them. So in taking them on that journey from a baby that you have to do everything for to an effective adult that will eventually leave you, I think part of that process is helping them to problem solve. And the way that that's linked to emotional intelligence is it's kind of linked to active listening as well. So if a child has a problem that's nothing to do with you really, so for example they're having friendship issues at school, or they're struggling with homework with older children or something like that, instead of jumping in and helping, you fish out the emotion behind what they've said. So if a child, say for example, said, I don't like going to Granny's, there's nothing to do there, instead of jumping in and going, I'm going to bring you lots of things to do, you just go, well, I hear you're bored when you go to Gran's. So you're fishing out the emotion behind what they say, and that opens up a dialogue nearly always. Or say, for example, I've got nobody to play with at playtime. I hear you're feeling left out or lonely. And that starts the dialogue. So you're not, instead of jumping in with solutions or suggestions or marching up the school and saying, why has my child got nobody to play with at playtime? What you're ending up doing is opening up the dialogue and just keep feeding back the emotion behind what the child's saying. And eventually the conversation will open up. They will hopefully start to sort stuff out themselves. And even if they don't come up with a solution, they will feel better for having been really listened to, because we feel really listened to when somebody hears how we're feeling, or somebody points out how we're probably feeling. And it doesn't matter if you get the feeling a bit wrong, because the child can correct you, but it's a different way of approaching problems to just jumping in and sorting everything out. And I used to use that as a teacher as well, back in the day. So it's very much along the lines of when I remembered to, rather than, because sometimes times, as you know, frantic as a teacher, it's easier just to come up with a solution. But in those odd moments where you've got time with the child and they say something, to do that is much more helpful, because you're making the child feel listened to, you're validating their emotion, and you're enabling a conversation that will hopefully help them to work out something or problem solve. So yes, it's a kind of a tool that it's definitely useful for parents, but I think teachers can use it too.
Absolutely. And I think that dovetails very nicely with the idea of co-regulation and working alongside the child rather than, as you say, either squashing their emotions, which I think was maybe it's a very old-fashioned idea now, you know, boys don't cry sort of thing. But that co-regulation, I think, fits very nicely, and being able to give words to those emotions is and for the younger children, I mean, I'm thinking like the preschool children, just just having those words and verbalizing them is so important. So children can then say, well, I felt, you know, things like disappointment and frustration are really difficult to put into words, aren't they?
Well, that's the other thing about that problem solving way, is you are helping them become more emotionally intelligent too, because you're pulling out the emotions behind what they're feeling, and you're labeling them, and you're giving them more vocabulary, which in itself makes you more emotionally intelligent, according to research. So, which makes sense, because if you've got more words to express how you feel, rather than just I'm happy, I'm sad, or it's a positive emotion or a negative emotion, then you are already tuning more into your emotions as you've got more words to hand to use to describe them.
Yeah, most definitely. So how does this help then with children's behaviour management?
Again, I think behaviour management, and although I don't like the term behaviour management always, I feel like meeting children's needs or something, because behaviour is communication, isn't it? When a child behaves in a certain way, there's something going on for them. There's a backstory. There's, you know, some children will repeat the same, you know, behavior, unhelpful behaviors again and again, and then authoritarian parents or teachers will come in and go, stop that, no I won't stop that, stop that, no I won't stop that, and you end up with that sort of situation where you've got basically locked horns with the behavior. And in actual fact as well, quite often authoritarian approaches trigger shame in the child, so it actually makes them behave in a worse way, or can make them behave in a worse way if the shame is a bit heavy-handed. So I'd say that again with and again also permissive, being really permissive and letting a child do whatever they want is also inappropriate, because children do things that actually are more, you know, unhelpful or damaging or so on. So the idea of this middle ground of authoritative parenting or teaching, I think goes hand in hand with emotional intelligence. Use it by using I messages or affective statements. So sometimes when you can remember to use them, when a child's doing the same thing again and again, and you can't sort of break that behavior, you can say, when you do that, I feel this. And the child, it's a less shaming response to the behavior. And you can also add on the end what you need them to do, or the impact the behavior has on you. But using those I messages is less shaming, and also can make the child to start to reflect on the idea that their behavior has an impact on another person. So I think that's one key role of emotional intelligence in behavior management, or meeting the needs. And also, again, that can, when you fish out the emotions, you know, I used to say to children, I wonder if you're feeling frustrated because blah, blah, blah. And it was a much better way of looking at the behavior than just going straight to stop doing that, or don't do that, or why are you doing that. Children can't usually answer why they're doing something. It's to fish out the emotions. I wonder if you're doing, if you're standing there refusing to do that because you're upset about what happened earlier, or you just speculate about what they might be feeling. And again, you can get it wrong, the child will soon correct you, but it opens up a dialogue and it breaks that sort of locking horns. And I've just thought of another thing that I do with teachers about emotional intelligence and behaviour management, meeting the needs, is looking at their own response. So the kind of things that kids do that can sometimes get under your skin are, if they're doing a point blank refusal, quite often teachers go into a terrible panic, you know, or that can be really unnerving, or if a child's rude to you, or if a child's escalating, if a child's, you know, for want of a better term, losing it. Those kind of three situations can often trigger quite uncomfortable emotions in teachers or parents. So in a way, as I was saying before, if you go straight to a reaction when you've had an emotion triggered, you're not likely to make the best choice in how to address that behaviour. So one of the things I look at with teachers is what's going on for you when a child is actually doing any of those three behaviours, to make it conscious and say, well, of course, it's perfectly normal to feel that way when a child's doing those things, but be aware of your reaction and don't let that impact on what you finally decide to do, so you can make more conscious decisions about how you're going to manage it, rather than, say, in the worst case scenario, lashing out and getting angry and aggressive towards the child, which thankfully is rare with teachers. But if it was, it just makes it far more conscious. So it's kind of about, making more deliberate decisions. So the effective statements, I think, are very important. The other thing to say is about anger, because we talked about anger earlier. Anger is really interesting. So parents find this particularly helpful, but there are links to teachers as well. So quite often when we're angry with a child, we're not actually angry. We express anger. But say, for example, a child's run off in a supermarket, and we're panicked, absolutely panicked, rushing around everywhere looking for that child. And sometimes when we finally find the child, the actual feeling is relief, but we might say, oh God, what did you do? And express a degree of anger, when in actual fact, what we're feeling, first of all, was we were scared and really worried and anxious. And secondly, we were relieved. But what we might sometimes express is anger. Same with teenager doesn't ring when they were meant to ring, or get home when they're meant to get home. We're worried, they turn up, we express anger, but in actual fact it would be far more healthy and helpful, and the child will receive it much better if we express the worry or the concern rather than the anger. Because as we all know, being on the receiving end of anger, it's very hard not to feel a degree of shame when somebody's being, or fear even, when somebody's being angry at us. Anger is totally valid as an emotion, but if it's a secondary emotion, it's better to express the primary emotion, the fear, rather than the anger, or the worry rather than the anger. So I think, again, that awareness, that emotional intelligence in managing your children's behaviour is just really helpful, rather than going to your automatic reaction. Again, another long answer for you, Kathy.
I know that's really interesting, actually. And having lost both my boys at various times in supermarkets and places, and I can absolutely, that takes me right back to that feeling of fear and just the whole range of feelings, really. And then you find them and all you do is shout at them, and what you want to do is just say, my goodness, I was so scared. But those are huge emotions, aren't they? But that kind of leads me on to another thought, really. What happens if you do get locked in a conflict kind of situation? And everybody's different. We have different personalities. As you say, some being realistic, there are always going to be situations which are more triggering than others for some people, because we've all got lived experiences as well, haven't we? So what happens if you do get stuck in that kind of conflict? How can emotional intelligence help us out of some of those conflict situations?
Very good question. So I think, again, emotional intelligence has a massive impact on how that's going to pan out. So, your classic example, the child doesn't want to brush their teeth, the child doesn't want to put their stuff away, whatever it is, and you want them to do it, and you get into the situation of, do it. No, I won't do it. Do it. No, I won't. And you've basically just locked horns with that behaviour. You might be having an emotional reaction as well, if you're not aware of it, which might make you behave in a way that's, you get more forceful, more kind of bullying, for want of a better word. And that doesn't really help the situation either. And nobody learns anything, and everybody's upset. And that's a really unhealthy conflict. Whereas a more healthy one is being aware. And often when children do these things, you're either kind of time short, you're stressed as a parent. It could be you really need to get on with something and your child's refusing to clean their teeth, and so you can lock horns into that. Whereas the more emotionally intelligent way of doing it is to, again, look at the emotions behind why the child is not or doesn't want to clean their teeth. So rather than just going, do it, no, do it, no, do it, no, you go, well, hang, and again, this takes a degree of being able to step back and look at it for the long-term gain, because at that point you might just really want the child to get into bed, and you might get authoritarian, like, just get into bed. Whereas the long-term gain can be had if you explore what's going on for the child, the why. And you can share your why too. You can say, I really need you to go to bed, darling, because I've got to get on with this and this and this. But they might, if you open up that dialogue, I'm wondering why you don't want to go to bed, or what's going on for you. They may share something that you really haven't thought of. Like, you know, it could be fear of the dark. When I go to bed, cleaning the teeth is the last thing I do before I go to bed. So I'm really scared about that. Open that dialogue, talk about it, get a little glowing night light, or solve the problem, or, you know, or talk with the child and work out what would solve that problem. Or, I don't like my toothbrush. It could be any number of things. But rather than locking horns with the do this, no, you explore the whys behind, which, as you say it out loud, is common sense. But when we're tired and we're not being overly conscious about what we're doing, we can quite often end up just locking horns. And we are only human. We have to forgive ourselves. I mean, you know, I can't claim perfect parenting by any means, who can? But yeah, it's kind of like, if you night after night after night your child is doing that, then trying a different tack will shift that deadlock, and hopefully you'll have a meaningful discussion. Your child will work out some problem solving skills. You're going to feel better for not having just got into that state of locking horns and a fruitless conflict, and it'll actually become a meaningful conflict. It's kind of, I want this, now I want this, right, how are we going to sort this out? You know, what's the feelings behind it? So again, all about dialogue, but prompted by this idea of, you know, what's emotionally going on for you? Why are you struggling with the idea of going to bed or cleaning your teeth or whatever? And even as a teacher, you can use that again with, especially if a child's repeatedly doing a behavior that's unhelpful or harmful or damaging. You can, you know, it's much more healthy, but rather than just telling the child to stop doing it, which, especially if they're repeating it, it's obviously not working. It's looking at what's going on for the child behind, what's emotionally going on. You know, there'll probably be some, quite often there's anxiety. They, you know, they won't admit it quite often, children, but there's worry and anxiety behind quite extreme behaviours. Or just fear, you know, fear, out and out fear, to take a risk, or, you know, everything's perceived. Certainly when I worked in the pupil referral unit, the children, their sort of cortisol levels were up there, so it didn't take much before they switch to, you know, no way would they ever be able to say, I'm actually scared. That would be far too emotionally intelligent just to declare that. We'd get all the behaviours, all the sort of resistances and everything. But you can, as a teacher, start to say, well, I'm wondering if you're a little bit worried about, you couldn't say out and out scared, or they would sort of be, don't be ridiculous, I'm not scared of anything. I'm wondering if you're a little bit worried about what's coming up, or, you know, and they would sort of respond to that better than me just trying to say, you know, you're doing that now. Because if you think about it, as adults, we wouldn't respond very well to we don't tend to respond very well to just, you know, get over there now, do that. It's much nicer if you can kind of see what's going on for the person if they're looking like they don't want to do something. So yes, there's lots and lots of links between emotional intelligence and meeting needs or managing behaviour. Yes.
Yeah. I just think that's so interesting as well, that you say that you don't know where their cortisol levels is when they actually arrive at the settings. I'm thinking especially early years settings, because you might not see that same child every single day. They might only come, you know, twice a week or something, or they might and I know certainly from my own experience, sometimes if children are with different parents over the weekend. They might present very differently on a Monday morning, depending on what sort of weekend they've had, or maybe they've had to separate from mum, or there's all sorts of reasons of that going on. But be able to stand back yourself and go, actually, what's this child experiencing? That's quite tricky though, isn't it? I mean, we've said that like it's an easy thing to do, but that's quite a difficult thing to do, isn't it?
Well, it is, because you can't do it all the time. When you're a teacher and you've got many children in your class, and we know this is like I don't know, the expectations of teachers have gone through the roof in recent years, and them sorting out every individual interaction with every child in their class and trying to optimize that is really unrealistic. But there are, so for example, as I said earlier, if there's a child struggling with the same behaviour that's unhelpful, whether, you know, it's not coming into class immediately, or which I'm sure many teachers naturally do, it's finding out the why behind that rather than just getting, which fortunately teaching has changed since I was at school, and it isn't just get in there and do that now, but it's looking for opportunities to open up that dialogue with the child when you can, to prevent those repetitive unhelpful behaviours. It's an ideal world thing. I know what it's like in a classroom, but it's just to stop that idea of it makes the behaviour less likely. If the child feels they've been listened to, they could be involved in the problem solving of the situation, again through a conversation, and the way always to start that dialogue is to talk about what might be going on emotionally for the child behind what they're doing.
Yeah. Wow, just so much great advice there, Molly. Just we've covered absolutely tons there already. If I had to pin you down though to one key piece of advice on emotional intelligence, what would that be for people?
Okay, if I think about my journey, I'd say it all started, well, I've got a funny story around that, and I do share it with anybody who will listen, in fact, Kathy. But the reason why my emotional intelligence sort of accelerated suddenly was to do with, have you ever heard of, I'll try anything, but have you heard of EFT, emotional freedom technique, which is about the tapping? Okay.
Yes.
So a friend of mine whose opinion I value very much, he just said, go and do it, go and learn EFT, Molly. That sorts emotions out, because I was talking to him about emotional intelligence. I said, oh, what is that? I'll go and have a look at that then. And I went off to an expert, and she taught me this tapping thing. And, you know, so I'm quite faddish, so I got into it. And whether it works or not is immaterial. It doesn't matter whether it works or not. I mean, it does seem to calm you, whether it's distraction or whether it is acupuncture points, whatever it is. That wasn't the main learning I took away from it. The learning I took away from it was when I had an emotional reaction to anything, I'd go, oh, I've had an emotional reaction, and I'd start tapping, which would detach me enough from the situation, whatever it was that had triggered the emotion, for me to then have time to go away, think about it, work out, oh, am I being a bit unreasonable there? What's going on for that person? And I'd start asking questions about the actual reaction, and it stopped any immediate impulsive responses. So, and then I could be curious, I could work out whether it would be best just to let it go, or go back and say something assertively, and so my main piece of advice I would say, in order to start that emotional intelligence and accelerate it, is the epitome is to become aware of emotions as they arise, because that's the make or break moment. So if you get tuned into yourself, which I guess is what mindfulness and all those things have been banging on about, is that idea that you're so present that as an emotion arises, you go, oh, look, there's an emotion arising. And rather than it taking you straight to an automatic reaction, which would probably be the same as you've done throughout your life if you've never questioned it, you start to become curious about it, and you start to think, well, is it a reasonable reaction? Is there a message from that reaction? Do I need to act based on that that triggering whatever's happened there? Do I need to talk to someone, or do I just need to learn to manage that emotion? So I would say that is Can I have a second one though?
Oh, yes.
So that's the main one, is to just try to get to the point where you're noticing your emotions so they don't catch you off guard. You notice them as they arrive. And I set that for homework to parents quite often, and especially when they're interacting with their children. Try to get to the point of noticing the impact of your child's behavior on how you're reacting in the moment, and make that more conscious, or any reaction you have. But the second one is about helping yourself and your children tolerate uncomfortable emotions. So quite often we're so scared of anticipating uncomfortable emotions. We're so scared we won't go outside our comfort zone. So for example, the one that everybody uses, standing up and talking in front of a lot of people, is uncomfortable for many, many people. So they don't do it, because they will anticipate that they're going to experience such awful, uncomfortable emotions that they just don't do it. So that's an extreme example. But throughout life, quite often, even being assertive towards someone, we can anticipate that's going to be so emotionally uncomfortable. I can't be assertive, because it is all well and good to say be assertive, but it actually requires a degree of emotional intelligence to do so, because you don't know what you're going to get, what's going to come back at you. They're not necessarily going, oh, that's very good, you've been assertive, I've taken that on board. They may come back with all sorts of things. So our tolerance of uncomfortable emotions, kind of like bracing ourselves and accepting that they are just a normal part of life, is another really helpful aspect of emotional intelligence. Look to see, am I trying to avoid any uncomfortable emotion, which is impossible in life? Am I changing my behavior to avoid something? Am I changing my behavior and not taking that slight risk that ultimately will probably pay off, because I'm staying so in my comfort zone because I'm scared of the uncomfortable emotions that could be triggered? So that's another one. And again, with children, most things that we have to achieve in life, so if a child's trying to learn to do their joined up writing or juggle or whatever, the discomfort of the uncomfortable emotions you have to endure while you're rubbish at something, you have to go through. So it's best that we can help children endure those uncomfortable emotions than try and sweep them aside or pretend, again, with that sort of parental thing of I'm going to sort it all out, I'm going to make it okay for you, when in actual fact accepting uncomfortable emotions that are fully a part of life is a much more healthy approach. So they're my two pieces of advice, which is, so become aware of emotions in the moment, and become more accepting of uncomfortable emotions, because it will mean you broaden your horizons and you won't have such a narrow comfort zone. So there's my two pieces of advice.
They're really good. I think they both work actually for both adults and for children, for practitioners as well. And I can think of all sorts of situations that maybe as a practitioner, as an early years educator, where maybe it is a bit nerve-wracking to go on a training course, or it's a bit, you're learning about a new pedagogy and it's all a bit new, and you've been doing this for years, and the thought of doing something new is quite scary. But having other people that do it with you and sort of go with that on that journey with you is so much better, isn't it? And actually sharing those emotions. Wow, great advice. I love it. We have only touched an absolutely tiny proportion of what you talk about, write about, blog about, all those sorts of things. So tell us where we can find out all the rest, Molly. Where can we go to get more?
The obvious starting point is my website, which is www.mollypotter.com. And from there, I think you can probably find my Facebook page, which is Molly Potter Books, I think. Twitter, although I don't tend to use Twitter so much. I've got a YouTube channel as well, which I think is Molly Potter Emotional Intelligence, although I haven't made a video for a while now. But there's stuff for early years teachers that would be useful on games and activities you can use with young children to explore emotional intelligence or develop emotional intelligence. So my website's the best place to start.
Absolutely. And there's loads of good things on there, folks. So go and have a look, have a read of the blog. There's some really, really proper thought-provoking blogs on there about all sorts of emotions, and some of the more complex emotions as well, such as disappointment and frustration, and things maybe that we're still struggling with as adults, let alone supporting the children with. So yes, I will make sure that all those links are in the words that go along with the video, Molly. And of course, all your beautiful books. Can it really be over 30 now? That's just fantastic. So well done on all of those. Absolutely fantastic. And thank you so much for coming on to the Early Years Summit and sharing all that information about emotional intelligence and how we can communicate better with children. Thank you very much indeed, Molly Potter.
Really my pleasure. Thank you, Kathy.
Oh, you're most welcome. And I look forward to welcoming everybody to the next session on the Early Years Summit, all about speech, language and communication.